All right, so we're right here at 5 o'clock p.m. We'd like to welcome all of our participants today to Deconstructing Vitamin D, which is a presentation by Dr. Carolyn Dean. And Dr. Dean being the author of The Magnesium Miracle with over 50 plus publications and 100 Kindle books. She is a doctor, a naturopath, and a researcher of epic proportions. She's also the CEO of New Capstone Inc., which is the umbrella company of RNAResetPro.com. And Dr. Dean has been working with the public in public health for many, many years, providing an incredible educational role through her best-selling book. I think she's probably taught the world about magnesium through Magnesium Miracle, but she hasn't stopped there. She continues to contribute in so many ways, and now building that bridge for practitioners, clinicians, and all kinds of healing modalities as well. So we're so thrilled to be able to present her this afternoon to you. Take it away, Dr. Dean.
Okay, thank you, thank you. On our radio show we have the children that come in and start yelling yay, so I was kind of waiting for the children, but not in our pro seminar. We're going to be very serious here and talk about deconstructing vitamin D. And I say it that way because there's so much information about vitamin D. It is really hard to pin it down. So I've tried to line up what I think is important, what I've learned over the years, especially in the last couple of years. So Jenny has gone through our second slide, and we'll jump right to the third slide, vitamin D overload. So I mean, this vitamin D overload, what seemed to happen in allopathic medicine was when calcium, yes, I have here, fell out of favor when we realized women especially were having increased risk for heart disease because of the calcification from taking 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium. I started to see the magnesium deficiency symptoms rearing up because these women were taking too much calcium. So when studies out of New Zealand actually came along, Boland had half a dozen studies, and they all said that this supplemental calcium that women were taking to supposedly protect their bones was actually causing problems. They didn't define why that was happening, and with my work on magnesium, I did realize that it was because they weren't getting enough magnesium to solubilize the calcium, and we're taking like dirt calcium that was only like 4 to 10% absorbed at most. But then as soon as we started pulling back on calcium, then along came high dose vitamin D. It almost seemed like allopathic medicine just wanted to have one favorite nutrient at a time that they could control. And all of a sudden, I mean, it might have been about 10, 12 years ago, on customers and clients, telephone clients I had, and then customers started telling me about, oh yeah, my doctor says I'm low in vitamin D, so I've been given 50,000 units, international units to take. And at first it seemed like they were taking it every day, but then it was once a week. And they began telling me about side effects. Their heart palpitations came back. People who've been on magnesium and especially been on Remag, they started having old symptoms come back, migraines lasting for weeks and weeks. So I realized pretty quickly that it was due to magnesium being overutilized to help metabolize vitamin D. And in the next slide, you'll see chart that I found, and with the magnesium highlighted for all the many steps in the vitamin D activation that occurs. Like there's a storage vitamin D or sunshine vitamin D or supplement vitamin D, food vitamin D. All of that has to be processed through these various pathways. And there are, 8 steps here that require magnesium. So if you give someone 50,000 units, the body immediately tries to activate it through these pathways, and the magnesium is used up. We even had I remember customers saying, and there were follow-up people who told us when they go to the beach and have a day in the sun, they start getting their twitches back, their magnesium deficiency twitches. In the next slide, deconstructing vitamin D, that topic, I began to look at all the studies with vitamin D, and there are just, thousands of studies that have been in the literature. This list is taken from Vitamin D Wiki. This is a gentleman who's really pro vitamin D, and over the years I've convinced him about the importance of magnesium, and he has a whole page now on the magnesium and vitamin D interaction. But all these studies, made everybody think that, yes, vitamin D is very important. So they started giving a lot of vitamin D, but without magnesium or without understanding the magnesium connection, which made the research kind of equivocal. They finally started a couple of years ago putting out papers saying, well, you do need magnesium with the vitamin D to make it work properly, but it has not hit mainstream. In the next slide, so I'm saying, repeating here, the flawed nature of most of the vitamin D research, because magnesium is never measured in these clinical trials. And if they did even try to measure it, they'd use serum magnesium, which is pretty useless. You have to use ionized magnesium as the proper test for the magnesium that will be getting into the cells. And actually, we're doing studies, university studies, and that's one of the things that we are proving and putting forth to the magnesium research establishment to let them know they're using the wrong test. Everything is flawed in magnesium research to a certain extent as well. But magnesium is so important, does so many things. It's responsible for 80% of known metabolic function, and I interpret that to mean it's responsible for about 1,000 enzyme processes, because there's 1,300 enzyme processes in the body. If you say 80% of the known metabolic functions requires magnesium, that's 1,000 enzymes, and that's Workinger. The reference on that is Workinger, Dr. Workinger. So the calcification that can occur due to high doses of vitamin D is modified by magnesium, which helps solubilize that calcium, and magnesium will direct the calcium into the bones and teeth, as will vitamin K2. So in the next slide, vitamin D3 versus vitamin D2. Now, there's so much confusion even about this. I went to Grassroots Health, which is my go-to for vitamin D research. Grassroots Health, hopefully most of you know about it. It's an organization started by Carol Baggerly. She had breast cancer. After she went through all the allopathic treatment, she found out that she had been very low in vitamin D. And when she looked at the vitamin D research, she found that if you have a high level of vitamin D, then you can be protected against breast cancer. So in their work, they found that when you give vitamin D3, you can get higher serum levels of vitamin D, the 25-OHD, than you can if you take vitamin D2. Vitamin D3 maintains higher levels for longer periods of time than D2. I used to think that D2 was synthetic and vitamin D3 was natural. I don't know if that's entirely the case, but I just know that vitamin D3 is better absorbed and stays with you longer. I do think a lot of the original 50,000 IUs of vitamin D was vitamin D2. Next slide. Yes, Grassroots Health, nonprofit public research organization dedicated to moving public health messages regarding vitamin D from research into practice. Now, they approached me about magnesium. Dr. Mercola told them about my work with magnesium and how I said that magnesium was necessary for vitamin D absorption. So we've been working with them in the sense of getting our customers to do the vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acid, TSH, and RBC magnesium tests. We still don't have an ionized magnesium test that's available. And during this testing, I found out that my vitamin D level was 19 nanograms. Now that should be, I have deciliter, that should be milliliters. I apologize. The vitamin D levels are in nanograms per milliliter. And after 6 months of 10,000 units of my D3K2, I went up to 53 nanograms per milliliter. But what is fascinating is my very high RBC magnesium level, which had been at 60, went down to 48. So that is my magnesium moving over to help metabolize the vitamin D. So there's a case study of one that shows what happens to your magnesium when you take vitamin D. I happen to have enough of it to spare. I did not experience any magnesium deficiency symptoms. Let's see what the next slide is. I'll get to the blood testing in a few more slides, but the vitamin D myths, I'm already talking about the 50,000 units and the fact that blood levels may increase. You know, they'll give 50,000 units, do blood tests in a week or two, but then if they do it in a few months, it will be low again. And I don't know how low, but I certainly don't recommend the 50,000 units. And it said that, you know, you take this one pill, 50,000 units every 1 or 2 weeks to address any issues. But what we have found out is vitamin D needs to be taken daily for the different processes that vitamin D is required for. Some of those processes need newly activated vitamin D every day. And another myth is you can take vitamin D on its own. And of course, all I've said so far is how magnesium is absolutely required to activate your vitamin D, even the vitamin D from sunshine. Okay, the next slide Yes, this was interesting because some people actually tell their clients to not take high doses of vitamin D because, oh, it's a hormone and you're not supposed to take high amounts of a hormone. So, you know, it concerned me a lot to hear that because, you know, right now as people are being told to support their immune system, and vitamin D is one of the immune system boosters, then you want to be taking enough vitamin D to reach, as one of the slides earlier said, you want 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. And the grassroots health even says that uh, you would want to be up to 90 nanograms if you're trying to prevent breast cancer or prostate cancer. So, in terms of this myth about vitamin D as a hormone, as I've written here, there's a small hormonal component that regulates the calcium, but the majority of circulating vitamin D is not a hormone. And this circulating vitamin D is used by nearly every cell in the body as a signaling molecule and for gene expression. So vitamin D is doing a lot. We really haven't gotten to the bottom of it all. I'm just presenting these, this text for you so that you can, sort of do your own research and find out more about it. But I think bottom line is we all seem to need more vitamin D. I mean, here I am living in Maui with a vitamin D of 19, or I was. Next slide. And food sources seem inadequate. Just the levels here of beef, eggs, shiitake mushrooms, only 40 units in a serving, 150 units in a serving of sardines or tuna. And even when they fortify the foods, you're only getting 100 units. And the RDA, I mean, it varies between 400 and 1,000. But as we're finding with calculating the blood levels and comparing that to your intake, people seem to need 5,000 to 10,000 units. The next slide. Okay, sunshine vitamin D is synthesized in the skin, and what some natural medicine practitioners may say, oh yes, just get your sunshine. And I mean, I've heard figures up to 10,000 units a day for light skin exposure, but I put down 5,000 because I think it's more average. But even that, it requires magnesium. Dark skin takes 4 to 8 times longer. So the more you tan, the less vitamin D you're going to get. And this is a fact that is a bit shocking. As you age, your skin loses 75% of its ability to make vitamin D. And of course, covered skin gets no vitamin D. I went to a conference and spent a couple weeks in Dubai and met with people in several health clinics, and they were all covered up from head to toe. And they realized they weren't getting their vitamin D. Sunscreens, that's going to cancel your sunshine vitamin D. And this other fact about sunshine D, you have to not shower for a few hours to get the maximum effective dose, and who's going to put up with that? So there's a lot of problems with telling people, well, just get 30 minutes of sun a day. And the next slide. Okay, testing. I probably should have had this earlier, but we measure circulating 25-OHD, and that is the stored inactive form of vitamin D, the supplemental form, but that's a standard blood test. So I've heard some health practitioners say, well, that's a terrible terrible blood test. It's not accurate. Why aren't we doing the activated vitamin D blood test? Well, there are reasons for that. It has a very short half-life, measured in hours, and kind of like serum magnesium, vitamin D in the blood is tightly regulated at a certain narrow range. And if the vitamin D goes lower, then the body will activate more vitamin D to make the active vitamin D level stay in that range. And that, as I say here, that range is controlled by the parathyroid hormone, calcium, and phosphate. They don't even follow magnesium or study magnesium with regard to how this range is read. So the 125-OH 2D levels do not typically decrease until vitamin D deficiency is severe. So it really can't be used as a measure. Now, where I think we run into problems with measuring the stored inactive form of vitamin D and translating that to the active is, again, if we don't have enough magnesium. It's not going to jump into the active form readily. It will wait, the body will wait until this, short half-life, 125, is so low that you're forced the body's forced to make more active vitamin D. I hope this isn't too confusing, but just to say that we have to keep measuring the stored vitamin D to get our values, and we have to keep giving people magnesium, Remag, if you're taking vitamin D. And the next slide. I'm sorry, my phone is turned on, turning it off. The dosage depends on blood testing. So we talked about the standard test, optimum levels 40 to 60, breast cancer, prostate cancer up to 90. And Grassroots Health has a vitamin D calculator. That's what it's called, vitamin D calculator, to determine the dose according to the blood levels. So when you get your 25-OHD blood level, like mine was 19, I put in the vitamin D calculator that I wanted to be 60. How much should I take? It came up with 10,000. And just a final note here, most of vitamin D's effects are through cell signaling and modulation of gene expression. And research is showing that needs the higher levels of vitamin D at 10,000 units. And the next slide. There's lots of cofactors for vitamin D. I think the more they study it, the more they'll realize the interactivity of all these nutrients. But we know both calcium and phosphorus, the magnesium, and potassium. I mean, potassium, I'm finding, is so closely related to magnesium in terms of how it acts in the body. So if you increase your vitamin D intake, it depletes your potassium. So is potassium activating vitamin D? I don't know that, but maybe as the time goes on and research goes on, we may find that to be true. And increased vitamin D intake activates this copper zinc superoxide dismutase, utilizing zinc and copper at higher levels. That's how they find out that it's required. And vitamin D deficiency is associated with sodium deficiency. A lot of people with weakened adrenals or hyperactive adrenals, dizziness, getting dizzy when you stand up, your blood pressure going low when you stand up. All those sodium deficiency symptoms are associated with vitamin D deficiency. And the next slide, this is where we'll talk to you about how we will support you with our nutrients. But I think this is where we'll take your questions, and we're in good time here. So, Ginny, will we do that? Take questions now before you go into the next level?
Yes. If anybody has any questions on what Dr. Dean has presented so far, you can definitely use the chat line. So far, we don't have any questions in the chat, and probably because you've done such a great job, Carolyn, of presenting the information. But if you do have specific questions relative to the presentation, just type them in, and we will take a look at those for sure before we move forward. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yes, and we do have questions. I mean, the people who know that we take questions beforehand to line them up. So, yeah, so Jackie sent me questions, good questions too. So I'll take care of these. First one: what is the role of fats in absorbing vitamin D, given that there are no fats in your D3K2? So we have a D3K2 algae product that we have a formula, and we call D3K2 Reset. And the reset part of it is our RNA drops powder. We dehydrate our RNA drops, and we call it an activator, a catalyst, and it really helps the absorption of so many of our nutrients. And although the literature does say that vitamin D is best absorbed with fats, what they're coming up with is that it's a low to moderate amount of fat compared to no fat or lots of fat. So, it's in this kind of gray area. Are you going to tell your patients that, oh, you have to take 11 grams of fat to help the absorption, but if you take 35 grams of fat, it's not going to help. So, kind of to get around those sticky, tricky kind of rules that seem to pop up all the time about how to take things and what's better, what's not better. We've just put in our RNA reset powder, RNA powder in with our formula, and the absorption seems to be just fine. What I found, I mean, I'm on a keto diet, but when I take my vitamin D, usually it's not with a meal, so I am not eating it with fat. And certainly my vitamin D went up dramatically over the 6 months with the 10,000 units. So I did not need fat with my vitamin D3K2. I don't know if that answers your question. Although, as I said, the literature just comes up with these notions that there's a gradient of how much fat you should take, and if you take too much fat, then it doesn't do you any good. Next question: please discuss the efficacy of sublingual vitamin D compared to D3K2. I don't have an answer on that. We are depending on, to a certain extent, the research with Grassroots Health for our information on absorption of various different vitamin D supplements. They do very in-depth analysis of all the different supplements that their clients are taking. and they come up with answers. I don't have an answer on the sublingual. I just wrote to them this morning about this, so I haven't heard back. As you can imagine, they're not going to get back to me within an hour. So we can have an answer on that as to what they're finding out. Number 3, review the safety of D3K2 when vitamin K is contraindicated because it enhances blood clotting, whereas we've had this epidemic of giving people blood thinners because there's an epidemic of atrial fibrillation, because there's an epidemic of magnesium deficiency. And what I came across when I was looking into this whole K2 interfering with blood thinners is a very good article. Actually, I'll go over to the chat and just put in the URL that I found to be very helpful. It's from prevmed.com, prevmedhealth.com. And I don't know these people, but I looked and looked for some decent information, and they go into all the various aspects of K2. It's K1 is the real coagulant. K2, not so much. K2 is being used as a heart supplement. Doctors just say, just don't take any K, whereas I'm doing a K2 with a meloquinone that is not said to be a coagulant. There are a lot of words in this article, and I'd rather people just sort of scan it. I haven't gotten around to really giving a summary of it. I don't know if you can summarize this information, but even K1, they say mostly interferes with warfarin. But now we're into the whole new species of blood thinners, Eliquis, etc., which does not act like the warfarin. So does that mean that K1 does or does not interfere with the Eliquis? K2, I don't believe it does. And what I did with the K2 was use the menaquinone that was not the clotting one, and I use a low dose. And the reason for the K2 is to direct the calcium that is absorbed with the vitamin D, direct that calcium to the bones and teeth. And something that Jackie, who's our pro manager, Jackie sent me this. Drugs that interfere with vitamin D absorption, and they include orlistat, which is your weight loss drug. Statins, they say, may inhibit vitamin D synthesis. Steroids may impair vitamin D metabolism, and thiazides may encourage hypercalcemia. And the source for that is a NIH health professional fact sheet. And let me just click on that and put that URL in the browser as well if I can. It's not cooperating. So maybe if Jackie is on the line, she can put it into the chat. So those were the 3 big questions. Back to you, Ginny, see if there's any other questions on the chat.
Yeah.
And if, go ahead.
I want to just follow up that David posted here on the chat line that vitamin K2 is got a study behind it showing that 45 1,000 micrograms or milligrams of the K2 is especially effective at encouraging healthy bone mineral density. So he wanted to make that comment on here on the chat line.
Right, and that amount, I mean, is that an amount that doctors will say don't use it because it affects your coagulation? That seems like a pretty high amount.
Right. One thing that I wanted to say, Carolyn, on the sublingual vitamin D and also the liposomal, and I've had this question come up before, is that the cost and the dosing is a little out of balance. A lot of the sublingual vitamin Ds have K2 much higher than the D3, and then the amount that you have to take of those products don't make them very cost effective. So I think those are other things to consider when you're looking at those forms, that the way they're formulated, the D is not as high as the K2. And then again, the price point doesn't make them effective. They're usually, 100 or 200 milligrams a dose, or they're, 1,000 IUs or whatever. And the D3K2 that we have is 5,000 per cap with a proper ratio of the K2. So I just did want to put that in the conversation. Here's some questions that came up. I understood that K2 was the most important cofactor for vitamin D, with magnesium, of course. So do you think that K2 is the most important cofactor, Carolyn?
I don't think so. Not when you look at all that magnesium does, and the lesser functions of K2. I think people who write about K2 and they know it's matched with D, they'll make it all about the K2, but you won't even find a word about magnesium. So I don't think that's the case. And I'm just looking at our the label of our D3K2. Our K2 is the MK7, 100 micrograms. So yeah, David's study that David mentioned with the 45,000 micrograms is way high.
Right. Very good. Very good. And of course, a lot of those, we know, Carolyn, because we were at the NIH in 2019 where we saw the jaws dropping of all the calcium researchers who learned about the role of magnesium in bone health. A lot of people want to send pitch hitters in for magnesium, but magnesium is as important as calcium in bone health. So with bone density, magnesium's a real factor. And if you're isolating K2 without magnesium in the bones, it's not going to be effective either.
Right. And when you look at this K2 study, 45,000 micrograms effective for healthy bone density, that's like a medicinal amount. And sometimes you can drive a reaction. Yes, we know K2 will push calcium to the bones, but then, what's the long term? What's the downside? Where's the calcium coming from? And once you run out of calcification calcium, and the person isn't getting it in their diet, and et cetera, then what's the long term?
Yeah.
So I don't like medicinal amounts of anything except magnesium.
Okay, Dr. Charles Benz wrote in, does Epstein-Barr deplete vitamin D3?
I don't know that answer. I know Ginny mentioned the NIH conference we went to, and one of the chief researchers there did a study on Epstein-Barr and magnesium, and made a big association there. But just think about it. Epstein-Barr virus antibodies are elevated in 90% of the population. And some people say that 80 to 90% of the population is low in vitamin D. So you're going to get a big correlation there. I mean, people who have viruses need vitamin D for their immune system. So, I mean, that's how I'll sort of dance around that answer.
Yes, and then he said, do vitamin D levels decline the further you are from the equator? Canada gets virtually none compared to Florida. And I know that Carolyn Baggerly has posted on many times, Carolyn.
Right. Yes, you can find words about that at grassrootshealth.net. They've done a lot of work. I know they have charts about location, but yeah, you think about Alaska, even the Arctic. What happens up there when they don't have sunshine half the year, or I don't even know how much sunshine they get. They're eating all those fish livers and seal blubbers and getting way high amounts of vitamin D and vitamin A. So
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And omegas.
yeah, yes,
Absolutely. Yeah, because
yeah,
there's a corollary with that too. The omegas, vitamin D and vitamin A,
mm-hmm.
being built through not only sunlight, not only our skin. And you talked last night about omegas in the skin, Carolyn. And so
Mm-hmm.
imagine your sunlight hitting your skin, pulling your omegas, working with your vitamin D and A, which are coupled to create those reactions. But also it works that way in the eye. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D is so important. There are vitamin D receptors in the eyes
Mm-hmm.
for to protect against macular degeneration and those kind of things.
Right, and we should just mention too that right here that we do an omega-3 algae A plus E. Didn't put the A in with the vitamin D3K2. I think they told us it wouldn't fit, but we shoved it into the omega-3 algae because vitamin A is very important, but high doses of vitamin A are not
Mm-hmm.
important, and that has been problematic in supplementation.
Yep.
Okay, so continuing on.
Let's see. Epstein-Barr and vitamin D3 linked to MS. Yeah, that's what
Right,
Dr.
right.
Charles Benz contributed here on the chat line.
Right, yes. Remember, yes, there are very high dose vitamin D protocols for MS. These are the people that are taking 50,000 IUs of vitamin D3 daily. And, we've had back and forth with various, people who say, well, it cured me. I'm not going to stop. And I just say, well, just keep taking your magnesium. That's because as an online dietary supplement company, we can't follow people or give them any medical advice. But with the practitioners, yeah, if I had someone with really bad MS and our Remag and Remite and all our products to help support their cellular structure. If that wasn't enough, then I would probably use high dose vitamin D3. But the feedback we do get from our customers is their MS symptoms are improving dramatically. So many people with nerve problems that I remember in med school, anybody with a nerve problem, right away we were told to look for MS. And a lot of people have been worked up for MS so much that they almost develop it with all the stress. But people have told us when they get their magnesium saturation, their nerve symptoms do seem to go away. We can't say that we're treating MS. We can't say we're treating anything. We're just supporting the structure and function of the body. Okay, Ginny.
That's absolutely right. Very good. Vitamin C, 100,000 milligrams, vitamin C effective against Epstein-Barr. Carolyn, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, we did this great radio show on our Monday radio with a whole lineup of vitamin C, orthomolecular vitamin C proponents, and some of the cases that they had was just incredible. Again, practitioners who have a clinic, do their IVs and can follow a patient. You can have someone in the throes of polio and give them IV vitamin C and watch that reverse. Yeah, that's what I miss about private practice is, we used to be able to do all these things. I don't know how people are managing these days with all the oversight, but absolutely high dose of ascorbic acid is a miracle. IV, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. All right. Well, we've got about 15 minutes to wrap up the webinar today. Let's go on to our next slide. Carolyn, if you agree, we've wrapped up our questions.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, you're on, Ginny.
oh, I'm on. Okay. 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 Welcome. Let me just say again as a wrap up that what we know vitamin D wise, and all we have to do is look at the state of the world right now to know that a lot of people are testing low for vitamin D. And as we've talked about, vitamin D is a proxy for sunlight. So we know that if people are not getting proper sun exposure, they're overusing their screens, and the blue light toxicity is affecting their bodies. They're indoor in artificial lighting. Their bodies are covered, and they do not have proper metabolism, the magnesium to metabolize their vitamin D. Then chances are they're going to be deficient. And we've seen that among all of the participants in the grassroots health program that we've done this testing. We know that optimal vitamin D levels right now between 40 to 60 in an average, just everyday person, but also 90 is very important and higher for cancer prevention and the reciprocal, which is prostate. And of course, we know that men and women over the age of 50 really should be doubling their dose for that reason. So that's what we're recommending, is to have that high dose vitamin D, especially right now as we move out of an even strong exposure to sunlight into the fall and winter months, when people get covered up even more. And we have to keep our vitamin D levels high because of the toxic overload we're facing right now in the environment, and also through this viral situation that we're in. D3K2 Reset has 2 caps, 10,000 IUs. It's just one of the simplest things in the whole wide world to do. It's highly absorbed. It has a great energy catalyst with the RNA reset drops, and it's got the appropriate balancing ratio of K2 in it. This is a very, very, very powerful positive product, and it's at a very good price point, very good price point for the consumer and also for our pros. The other thing we want to offer to you in the next slide is that we want to remind everybody, of course, that supplementation has to be paired with magnesium. We've got the K2 and the D3K2, but that remag, and I just want to say again, there are 2 aspects, especially when we're talking about viruses. We know that viruses are processed at the cellular level, okay? So a body's receptivity and proclivity to viral attacks is at a cellular level. And there are 2 factors that are going to mediate this attack, and one of which is going to be magnesium, because GTPase, the enzymes that work to coat the outside of the cells and prevent an RNA fragment from gaining access to the cell, reaching in, pulling out DNA and replicating itself, creating those proteins and causing that cytokine storm, are going to be prohibited if magnesium is paired with that GPTase enzyme and it's standing on the outside of the cell. That's just number one. That is like two big, huge bouncers on the outside of your nightclub. They're just not getting in there. And that's what we want to do preventatively, is keep the body saturated with magnesium. So we know if we've got that saturation going, people are drinking their magnesium water during the day. Your patients and consumers can be using it in a very similar way. We want to keep the body saturated. Next thing, if it were to break through because of magnesium deficiency, vitamin D is going to set a standard against the way that that virus interacts in the cells because of its relationship to DNA and RNA. We want to have that standard there too. This is a pow, bam, bam against the viral environment that we're in right now. And we really, really want to encourage people, because of the high absorption of Remag and the unique way that this D3K2 is formulated at such a high dose with the K2 and also with that energy catalyst in it. This is going to be an essential protocol for you to implement with your patients if you're so inclined. I mean, I can't even think of anything that would be better. This is the thing that we are just really, really encouraging people to consider. So on the next slide, what we're going to say about the RNA Reset Pro is, as a pro, then you've been with us on this call today, and all the pros that are going to listen to this event going forward, you have an opportunity to build your own bundles through our on-site store, and you can also do a doctor-to-door program, which is basically drop shipping. And either way, just to even add integrating Remag and D3K2 into your existing protocols is a massive game changer. They're at incredible price points. They are going to pay you good commissions so that you can afford to install them into your practice. We're going to drop ship them for you, and they are going to be a health asset that just can't be beaten right now. I mean, there's just no way to beat this. You won't want to combine a D3 with a substandard poorly absorbed magnesium. Why bother? The body's just going to expel it, and it's not going to be able to do its beautiful work that the Remag does. So we want to really encourage you, get that Remag in hand, get that D3K2, get that moving throughout your patient base, and let them report back to you how it's improving their health, their vitality, their well-being, their sleep, their hair, their body function, their immunity, and allow you to really be impressed with what they can do. So on the pro side, just to be clear, you can start building your online protocols that both you and your customers will benefit from. So this, you can do it all kinds of different ways. We have our pro managers, both James and Jackie and Megan, all working together to get you situated the best way that we know how, with things that are really going to make a difference for you. And Dr. Charles Benz is saying, thank you for the excellent program. Thank you, Dr. Benz, for participating, and everyone participating today. We encourage you to visit rnaresetpro.com/onsite to learn about the on-site store program, or /D2D to learn about the doctor-to-door program. Carolyn, is there anything you want to add?
I mean, there is so much to say about vitamin D. I think that, I mean, it covers what concerned me about how to make vitamin D work better. You know, get the vitamin D3, use it with a low dose K2, use it with magnesium. I think that covers the high points. And use the grassrootshealth.com vitamin D calculator and send your patients there, because once they see, oh yeah, if my blood level is this low, I do have to take high amounts. And it's very useful. I mean, the Grassroots Health people have done a great job, and there's a lot of good information there that you can study. So I think that's it.
Very
We're on
good.
Time. We're on
Very
time for
good.
once. Yeah.
The calculator link is at Grassroots Health. Let me see if I can find it for you really quick. The other thing that they recommend is an app that you can get on your phone called the D Minder. The D Minder. and you can look at that as well. It's a wonderful, let me see, I got the link for the calculator, and I'll post it here on the chat line. But, oh, very good. Thank you, James. James did it for us. Thank you, James. The other thing with the D-Minder app, it's phenomenal, and it answers Dr. Benz's question about how much sun you need in Canada versus how much you need in Maui versus how much you need in Sri Lanka, because it actually uses GPS to triangulate your longitude and latitude. It can calculate the strength of the sun, the amount of clothes you wear, your skin type, and it's going to tell you exactly how much sun exposure you need to get a certain amount of IUs of vitamin D every day. So that's another fun thing. Again, it's called the D-Minder. It's on the App Store, or, you know, saying whatever, Samsung, wherever you get their apps. So, well, Carolyn, thank you so much for doing this today. I just think it's incredible information, and really, really appreciate taking the time to speak with everyone today.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's great to share the information that I've learned over the past number of decades. So anytime anyone has questions, just funnel them through Jackie, and they'll get to me. So I really like answering questions because I always learn from the questions I answer. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, James, Jackie, everybody on the call today. Thank you so much.